Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maharis Narani, and I am the Digital Communications Specialist with the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Welcome to our next session in the Black History Month Speaker Series. We are so excited to welcome Greg Frankson to Western. Before we begin with introductions, I would like to make you aware of some resources available to attendees. The closed captions have been enabled. You can access them, access the captions by hitting the CC button in your control bar. The chat function has been disabled for this event. If you have a question, please submit it to the Q&A tab in your control options, and we will review them at the end. We will begin with a land acknowledgement offered by Amani.
We acknowledge that Western University is located on the traditional lands of Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, Lenapehoak, and Chinookta nations on lands connected with the London Township and Sombra Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, Wampum. With this, we respect the longstanding relationships that Indigenous nations have to this land as they are the original caretakers. We acknowledge historical and ongoing injustices that Indigenous people endure in Canada, and we accept responsibility as a public institution to contribute toward revealing and correcting miseducation, as well as renewing respectful relationships with Indigenous communities through our teaching, research, and community service.
Thank you, Amani. Now we welcome Eunice O. from the Western University Student Council to introduce our special guest speaker.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Eunice Oladejo. I'm the Vice President of External Affairs for the University Students Council. On behalf of the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, I would like to introduce our fourth speaker as part of the Black History Month Speaker Series at Western University. Greg Frankson is the founder and CEO of VoiceShare Inc., which provides training, coaching, mentorship, and consulting services focused on transformative organizational change through inclusive leadership and effective communication. Prior to creating VoiceShare in 2018, Greg was a teacher, arts educator, event producer, corporate trainer, and anti-discrimination facilitator. Throughout his career, Greg has used his voice to create social change as an advocate, award-winning literary artist, and media commentator. Artistically, he published 4 poetry collections, contributed to 3 anthologies, edited AfriCANthology, Perspectives of Black Canadian Poets, and released 4 full-length audio recordings, among many other achievements. He was also an on-air poetic commentator on Here and Now Toronto on CBC Radio 1. In community, his leadership resulted in the overdue commemoration of Robert Sutherland, Canada's first known university graduate of color and first Black lawyer, at Queen's University and across Canada. His words have been published in periodicals and poetry journals on 3 continents. Greg is also a former Canadian National Poetry Slam champion, an inaugural inductee to the Verse Ottawa Hall of Honor, and past poet laureate of the International Initiative for Mental Health Leadership. He served on the boards of Ottawa Community Immigration Services Organization and Tropicana Community Services. He currently serves on the Prince's Trust Canada Board of Directors and chairs the Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility Advisory Council at Abilities Center in Whitby. Greg has left a lasting impact at his alma mater, Queen's University, as its first Black student government president, former student senator, and ex officio trustee, and long-serving current member of the University Council. He graduated from Queen's in 1999 with a Bachelor of Arts and Bachelor of Education degrees earned concurrently, and is a member of the National Communication Coaching Association, League of Canadian Poets, and the Ontario College of Teachers. As a first-generation immigrant myself and a Black student leader, I'm so excited to hear from Greg as he shares with us his talk titled Reimagine Blackness in Canada, Black Advocacy through AfriCANthology. On behalf of Western University and the London community, I welcome you, Greg.
Well, thank you very, very much, Eunice. That was incredible. I am deeply honored by that introduction, and feel like that was absolutely just incredible and remarkable. So I'm just going to wait a moment here. I'm not sure what happened with the screen, so we'll try that again and see if it switches. All right. Mars, I'm not sure what's happened, but it doesn't appear that that I'm on camera. So we will have to see if we can make that possible. Just a moment, everyone. Okay. All right. While we figure that out, I'm just gonna proceed, and I'm gonna say thank you once again to Eunice, to the Office of Equity, Diversity, Inclusion at Western, and to all of you for spending this time with me here today. I'm really honored to be able to share with you good folks here at Western today. So I'm going to begin just by making my slide available for all of you to see. So there you go. I am really happy, as I said, to be here and appreciate all of you taking the time. My talk, as was stated at the beginning, is Reimagine Blackness in Canada, Black Advocacy through AfriCANthology. And so I wanted to begin just by giving you a really quick overview of where I'm going to go with this. So I'm just going to start off with some tributes. I'm going to go into talking a little bit about what happened before AfriCANthology, then get into specifics about what AfriCANthology is about, how it's relevant to what's going on today, and then talk about the future. So to get that going, I will start with the poem that pays tribute to the First Nations and Inuit and Métis people, the first inhabitants of Canada. And this poem is called Grand Entry. In the heart of Kanata, by the edge of the river, planted in Turtle Island, feel the beat of the drum, traditional expression of the depth of the culture moving into the circle that's surrounding the drum. The dancers fancy shawling and the singers are calling to the beauty that's within us and responding to the drum. Invited to be in it, all our cultures join together, and the unity created when the people start to come inspires understanding, commonality of purpose, dedication to the service of the people of the drum. First Nation land beneath us, multicultural in nature. We in Canada are welcome now to come and join the drum. The drum, the drum, the rhythm of the drum was the heartbeat of this nation from the day it was begun. And at the final moment when our life on earth is done and the oceans turn to salty beds beneath the burning sun, the drum, the passion of the drum will continue to reverberate long after we succumb. Beyond that final moment, after all that we've become, then the land will surely echo with the silence of the none. The drum, the power of the drum is the universal language at the tips of all our tongues. So at the present moment, all together, everyone, in the name of global healing, let's pay homage to the drum. First Nation land beneath us, multicultural in nature. We in Canada are welcome now to come and join the drum. The dancers fancy shawling and the singers are calling to the beauty that's within us and responding to the drum. Traditional expression of the depth of the culture moving into the circle that's surrounding the drum in the heart of Kanata by the edge of the river planted in Turtle Island. Feel the power of the drum. The drum, the rhythm of the drum in the heart of Kanata. Feel the power of the drum, the drum, the drum, the passion of the drum planted in Turtle Island. Feel the beat of the drum. And so I say that respectfully, and that's how we begin to pay respect to those who were here first. But of course, this conversation is very much focused on Black Canadians. And so when I talk about Blackness in Canada, I am deeply motivated by what we are able to do for the newest and next generations that are to come. And so I want to situate the rest of my talk by beginning with a short poem. It's written in the style of a prayer. It is called Fortitude Prayer, and it is dedicated to Black children, to young children of African descent. And it goes like this. My body is a temple that I honor with respect and treat like a blessing from above. My mind is the power and foundation I set, made of strength, intelligence, and love. My life is like a canvas, my experience is paint, a work of art I'm proud to display. My soul is God's gift that he bestows without restraint and guides my heart through each day. Lord, grant us the wisdom, fidelity, and pride to clear our own paths to the light. And may we reach our goals with our people in stride who keep the same vision in sight. For when I'm at the mountaintop, the vista is clear and Africa calls out its refrain. God grant our great people elevation over fear and the unity to reign once again. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for those who are here. Thank you for those who are to come. And I am very excited about the future of what we can do together in order to build a better Canada, one where Black Canadians are at the center. So let me not delay any further and get into the meat and potatoes of what I want to talk about with you all today. So I first of all just want to begin by talking about what I was doing before I got to doing AfriCANthology. And before AfriCANthology, I was growing up as a young person. You know, I come from a Jamaican family. I was raised by my mom with my eldest sister, and the three of us lived together. My dad did not live with us. I did not have a relationship with him as a kid. And so everything that I wanted and everything that I learned to desire and drive and strive for came through the household that my mother provided for myself and my sister. And so in that house, in that space, I fell in love with words at a very, very early age. My mom was an avid reader, voraciously just gobbling up book after book after book. And I saw her doing this. And so I became interested in doing the same. And so from before I even entered elementary school, I was already reading books and interested in and loving of the word. All through elementary school and all those times, I learned about music, I learned about poetry, and I learned a little bit about myself as a creative being. And those sorts of things kind of came together when I was 12 years old. I went on a visit with my family to Queens, New York, to visit my aunts and my cousins. And in the main house in Queens where my aunts lived, we had one cousin who lived in the basement apartment. And he introduced me to some underground hip hop MCs that he knew in New York. And one of those guys sat me down and asked me, you know, do you like to write? And I said, yes, I love to write. I do poetry, I read, I sing. And he says, have you ever written hip hop before? And I said, no. And he showed me how to write a hip hop verse. So from there, I just went on this artistic journey to learn a little bit more about how to create and how to express myself. And then as I got into high school, started to explore issues of social justice and got to meet my classmates who came from many different backgrounds. And we all worked and built together such that I became very interested in social activism myself as a way for me to pursue things that I found of interest. And so from that early initiation, I found myself moving on a path towards working with other Black youth in the community in Scarborough and becoming an anti-racism activist at the age of 15. Well, then I graduated high school, went to Queens, and as Eunice mentioned, I became the first Black president of the undergraduate student government there and used that time to advocate for the proper commemoration of Robert Sutherland. And so through those actions and activities became even more deeply ingrained in what it was going to take in order to live a life of activism and service to the Black community and to the broader community more generally. And so I continued on that path, left Queens, moved to Montreal, lived there for 3 years and worked there as a teacher before ending up in Ottawa, where I found my way into spoken word poetry, moving off the page and onto the stage, using the skills that I learned from singing in choirs as a youth, using the skills that I had learned writing hip hop and performing in hip hop groups. In high school, I performed with Shaw Claire, the Juno award-winning rapper. And so, it was all deeply ingrained in me. So I used all of those skills and talents, plus my mind for social justice, and put that all into my poetry and became Ritallin in 2003. And so from then until now, I have been engaged in music, creativity, efforts to create change, social activism, and anti-Black racism. And then later on in the path, I ended up stumbling into the world of mental health, and mental health advocacy became a big part of who I was and what I did. And so after finding spoken word, I found my way all the way into poetry slam. And for those of you who may or may not be aware, poetry slam is a pretty powerful form of competitive literary art. And I managed to make my way into the national competitive situation. And so on that path towards the national championship that I won in 2012, I had a number of very powerful presentations and performances. So what I'd like to do now is share one of those performances here with you today. So I'm going to just put it up on the screen here, and you folks will be able to see this particular performance, which was from the 2011 championships. And the poem is called Home is Here.
Where are you from? No, let me ask that again. I said, where are you from? Because Black folks are definitely not Johnny-come-lately. Our contributions are critical, central, and stately. When Champlain claimed New France for the Gaul with the crown, who did he have with him to guide him around but Matthew da Costa, who knew the lay of the land, and the languages spoken we know he could understand. But how would he know them unless he got here before the man credited with breaking new ground in our road? The sheer gall with which power tries to silence, suppress the pain and the triumphs of my people, I guess time is now I say something and make myself clear. My home is here. East York is the place where my life began, at Toronto East General Hospital, by the capable hands of a Polish-born doctor who had a daughter the same age. He and my Jamaican mom watched as both children were raised by people who came to Canada for hope and a chance that their kids would develop the means to advance and have impact, and blaze a path curtained in snow in a land where my black ass at 20 below, shivers shaking in shelters to go fight for my due. But now I plow ahead knowing what all of us knew. This nation was snatched from indigenous hands and built by their blood at oppression's commands, disenfranchised, ignored, and whitewashed to submit to the dominant power of the French, the Brits, all the way to today, and the rest benefit from the theft of a livelihood we won't admit, provides a foundation for an immigrant preserve, while original peoples live third world on reserves. I'll take a walk around downtown Halifax. There's Black people there endured centuries of viciousness, violence, despair, oppressed by their neighbors and the governments of the day. Did you think that those memories would simply fade away? The Loyalists, Maroons, and Africville stains are notable due to overt glints of chains. Revisionist bigots tried to gloss over those crimes of humanity, held hostage by their odious designs. I remind all those people who think Canada's mosaic is anything but farcical, mythic, and prosaic, that if you scatter a mess and then claim that it's beauty, to refuse to clean it up is dereliction of duty. When that's followed by attempts to cover up mistakes, how can we boldly assert that we're better than the states I declare? Those who question my rights to this place, based solely on the color of my skin and my race, have been brainwashed to believe our history is only white, and Laurier, King, and Trudeau held up right are the models our kids must be taught in our schools, and I hope we adults are uncritical fools who revered that old leader, who gave Smuts the idea to fleece black South Africans like Jason and Medea and build a golden oasis, an African sanctuary based on our racist Indian acts. We've duped the unwary to believe King's xenophobia and Trudeau's false construction of a society that justly birthed racial hatred's destruction. That idea is so ingrained, is now treated as fact that our nation is the world's promulgation of a pact that assures immigrant groups that their voices abroad can be stifled over here. That perspective's a fraud. Black people here can tell you that racism's alive and encumbering restraints so that it's harder to thrive. So Dave Heaton don't step up and glibly succumb to the urge to ask with arrogance, hey, where are you from? I'm born of this land and it's here that I remain. And the depths of my roots allow me to ascertain without doubt that this land of water, rocks, trees, and ice is exactly where I belong. My forebears paid the price so I can stand here and stay with no shame and no fear. My home is here.
And so from seeing that, you get a sense of the energy and the passion and the dedication that I put both into my art and into my social justice advocacy, that was very much a part of my poetic journey. And so it led very naturally for me into the idea of creating AfriCANthology. And so this is where we shift gears now into talking specifically about the book. So here it is, AfriCANthology, Perspectives of Black Canadian Poets, which of course was released officially on the 1st of February. But it's an idea that's been almost a decade in the making, thinking about different ways that we could bring together some of the great poetic minds of Canada from coast to coast, so that they could not just share their artistry, because we hear and see and read their artistry all of the time. What I really wanted to do was to provide an avenue for these very intelligent, hardworking, dedicated, impassioned individuals to talk about their own journey in their Black skin and to talk about some of the experiences that they've gone through trying to make a living and to make a career out of the poetry and out of their Canadianness and the Blackness that they embody as they walk around every day. And so for me, this is a labor of love and a very important contribution that I wish to make to the greater national conversation about where we go as Canadians. And so here we go now. I am going to read my poem, because not only did I edit the collection, I also contributed to it. And I'd like to read the poem that I contributed to AfriCANthology for you here today. The poem is called The Blackened Room. Open the door. Step inside the contours of your fear. Caress the warp in your perception that braids devastation to your cranium tight like rows of Negro corn as each footfall draws you deeper. Wrap yourself in the blackness like a discomforted comforter too warm that leaves you sweaty, restless, confused, discombobulated equilibrium. Dissolve matter into the ether. Argue spiritedly with the lives you'd meant to live before this. The door groans shut behind you, cuts off all possibility of escape, bidden by the highest bidder who enslaves you to new terror, bitter as the sea salt that transported anxiety-addled chattel from foreign sands through the hourglass. You are diminished, once plucked from indigenous land and cast onto red-soaked soil unfit for your roots, shrunk down to near enough to nothingness, pulverized in aggregate to be ground down into building blocks of oppressive freedom, shackled by the petrification of ambition and unfree wills, a testament to the death of one's hope. Newly nested in pathology that holds you fetal, fragile like an eggshell, broken open, oozes unrestrained like a liquefied scream. A race to fill cracks and crevices whips quickly across sullen floorboards, desperate search for unattainable wholeness in the fetid, dank vacuum of a space that proffers no gentle companionship on the journey to pernicious perdition, just a middle passage from here to where fear lurks in dark corners, waiting. And so we're very privileged to have some very powerful contributions from poets from across the country who have helped and contributed to this particular collection. And And what's pretty spectacular about this was just the process of all of these folks coming together. So I reached out to many writers from many different parts of the country. Of course, it's and we did the project very quickly. We took about 1.5 years from the time that we confirmed the proposal to the actual day that the book was released. So that's very fast in the world of publishing, but managed to get an excellent crew of people to agree to participate in the project, and not just to give us their poetry, but also to contribute the essays that gives so much of the soul and substance of this book and gives it the color and tenor that provides that opportunity for folks to get a little bit deeper into what it means to be a creative person, to be a creative Black person in the third decade of the 21st century, and what our journey is like right now, what it's been like to get to this point, and what we have in mind for what the journey could look like in the future. And so the book really does cover a multiplicity of different issues and gets right to the nut of what it is that people are truly struggling with. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the specific contributions in a minute or so. But what I really want to first talk about is just this broader conceptualization. So AfriCANthology is the collision of 3 words: African, Canadian, anthology. And so it really does seek to encapsulate all of that. It is an anthology of thoughts of African Canadians, of their perspectives. It's also a comment on Canadian culture. And it's meant to be something that carries on beyond just this volume. This is meant to be the first in a series of volumes that look at different aspects of Black Canadian culture, the people who are creating those contributions, and the lived experiences that they are having in order to do the work and to create the Canada that they are creating through their words, deeds, actions, passions, and opinions. And so as part of that process of creating those books and providing a longer term vehicle for those books and for those stories to live on, we're also creating a national not-for-profit organization, AfriCANthology Canada, which over the next year or so, as we put together the foundations of that group, will seek to have that as a living, breathing, evolving piece that will be involved with both the books as well as online and digital aspects, in order to provide a home for all of these stories and a platform for us as Canadians to interact and to talk about the stories that are being brought to the fore through the books in the AfriCANthology series as we create them. And so I do want to take this time now to sort of drill down more specifically on the book itself, its contributions, and its contributors. But let me set the stage for exactly what AfriCANthology is and what it's all about. I want to take this moment to read to you the introduction of the book, to give you a clearer sense of what's contained in its pages. AfriCANthology, Perspectives of Black Canadian Poets, is a curated collection of poetry, essays, conversation, and short fiction from some of Canada's most accomplished, urgent, and inspiring creative voices. The language of Black writers from coast to coast has been incorporated within its pages to challenge you to reflect upon and respond to the realities of us. Experiencing this book is not meant to be a passive action for those who read it. The time for passivity in the face of challenges examined by the anthology's contributors demands more from you, and demands that it happen immediately. Patience has been exhausted as surely as we are exhausted by the personal and communal impact of our racialized existences. This book is both a celebration and a warning. It celebrates Black life, honors Black struggle, commemorates Black legacy, and trumpets Black triumph. It doesn't require anyone's permission to exist, nor the approval of anyone else to claim victory. It is an unruly, noisy, free-flowing, multifaceted glimpse into what it means to identify as Black in the third decade of the 21st century in Canada. The stories are told from multiple vantage points, rooted in unique yet familiar experiences, and using a variety of literary devices and formats in both official languages. By choosing to include Black Francophone voices from Quebec in this collection, we made the point of publishing these words en français, immediately followed by an English translation, to ensure their original meaning cannot be mistaken or misinterpreted. All works appear in the table of contents with their titles in the mother tongue of their authors as another way of reinforcing the honor we place upon the words of every contributor to this anthology. We wish to sidestep the confining prism of the two solitudes dynamic in favor of an expansive view of Blackness that unifies us through our shared experiences rather than divides us based on the cultural identity squabbles of the white-dominated Canadian political classes. We create our own history here and do so unapologetically and fiercely. Our stories, once told, cannot be untold. We tell them for our ancestors, for our descendants, for our contemporaries, for ourselves. We tell them for history, for our voices matter. And by recording them here, we ensure that the substance of our souls reflected in these pages will have resonance long after we can no longer draw breath. We leave clues about the past for future generations of all origins through the publication of our words in the present. It is a gift intended for those from whom we've borrowed the world we currently inhabit. We consider the recording of these words to be a solemn responsibility. This is not a publication created with casual intention. We are not naive. This is how we capture and transfer the work to those who will eventually pick it up and continue it one day. We hope this encapsulation of our creativity is enough. We believe the generations to follow us will be enough. We trust that by the time they inherit these words, that enough is enough. So, that gives you a sense of the energy and the power behind the words in this collection. And I have to tell you, we have incredible, incredible contributors. And I just want to very quickly just name each of them so that you can see, the depth of who we have in this book. Afua Cooper, one of Canada's great custodians of our Black Canadian history. Read Israel Jones, one of the founders of the Word is Bond Collective in Halifax and a former National Slam champion. Evelyn C. White, Halifax-based, who is the writer of the official biography for Alice Walker. Tondeway McCarthy, situated down in Fredericton, New Brunswick, one of the co-founders of the New Brunswick Black Artists Alliance, the first organization of its sort ever in the province of New Brunswick, and a young up-and-coming artist. Ali Ndiaye, also known as Webster, one of the most prominent Francophone hip-hop poetic artists in the province of Quebec, who also does incredible work on archiving, housing, and sharing the history of Black Canadians in the province. Chloe Savoie-Bernard, another up-and-coming Francophone artist based in Montreal, whose feminist writings are well-known and well-respected throughout the province. Rodney Saint-Éloi, two-time winner of the Governor General Literary Award for French language poetry, powerful Haitian Canadian artist, also in Montreal. Jamar Amir Akbari, also known as Jamal Jackson Rogers, or Just Jamal the poet, former poet laureate in the city of Ottawa. We also have, of course, Dwayne Morgan, spoken word legend, another fellow Scarboroughan like myself, and a two-time National Slam champion, among many other accolades. Andrea Thompson, who many of you heard from yesterday, is a spoken word legend in this country and has done incredible work on page and on stage. Asante Houghton, a young up-and-coming artist in the Toronto area, who's probably best known for his mental health advocacy and working on having the police change their approach to mental health responses so that we can have a more community-engaged approach. We also have George Eliot Clarke, of course, the Governor General Award winning poet and former parliamentary poet laureate and poet laureate of Toronto. Olive Sr., who's won every major award you can possibly think of throughout the Commonwealth and around the world, who also serves now as the Poet Laureate of Jamaica. Truth is a former National Poetry Slam champion, one of the founders of Guelph Spoken Word, and one of the most powerful voices in all of spoken word in the country. Bertrand Bickersteth, based out in Alberta, who's done incredible work on chronicling the history of Blacks on the prairies, and an incredible writer who's just won a major poetry award for his most recent collection, The Responsive Weeds. Valerie Mason John, one of the co-editors of The Great Black North, which was one of the great collections of Black Canadian poetry in this country, who's done incredible work in a bunch of other fields, including fiction and wellness. And then we also have Cicely Bell Blaine, who's one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter Vancouver, who also was nominated for several awards for their most recent and first poetry collection, Burnt Sugar. And finally, Wade Compton, who is a very well-known Vancouver poet and artist who's done a lot of work around Hogan's Alley, the traditional Black community in Vancouver, and currently teaches at Douglas College. So you can see that we've got this huge breadth of folks who are talking about incredible issues, talking about police abolition. We've talked about, how difficult it can be as Black artists to get financial support for community events targeted at the Black community. We have a lot of discussion around identity, whether that be as mixed race people or as, mixed race people or, oh my goodness, I'm sorry, I just lost it. It was on my tongue. Mixed race people or folks who are identifying in terms of their gender identity, of course. And then, there are very interesting poems that are about the pandemic and the COVID-19 moment in which we find ourselves. And the list goes on and on of the incredible level of depth, people talking on a very intimate level about some of the most difficult challenges that they've experienced as Black people and as Black artists, to coming out to finding the N-word written in snow on your car, to the kind of abuse that you get because you carry around a green canvas knapsack with the wrong kind of initials on it, or to talk about a poem about how you're so angry that you had to take the time to analyze your anger and share the analysis of your Black anger with your audience. So these are some of the powerful contributions that we have in the book. And speaking of that green canvas knapsack, that is my contribution, my essay contribution to the collection, and so I'd like to share a small selection out of that for you to read and to stoke your interest. So my essay is called "The Green Canvas Knapsack: Sexuality, Identity, and the Orientation of Social Justice," and I'll just read the beginning of the essay. If you are a person of a certain age, you will remember the period in the 1980s when going to school with a canvas knapsack slung over one shoulder was all the rage. Made with leather shoulder straps connected to the main body of the bag by metal rings, the main section's opening at the top was held shut by a leather drawstring and covered by a flap. A couple of pockets for holding smaller items were on the front. The two most common colors were black and green, though I recall seeing some in other shades like white and red. In 1986, when I was 11 years old, I had a green knapsack that I absolutely adored. I stuffed it full of my textbooks, workbooks, binders, and gym clothes. The weight would eventually stretch the right shoulder strap so that it was longer, a touch thinner, and a bit weaker than the left strap. But it didn't matter much to me because only loser kids wore them using both straps. I dutifully lugged it onto the school bus each morning. When we'd arrive in front of St. Barbara Catholic School on Jan Ray Drive in East Scarborough, I'd jump off and head into the schoolyard to play with the other kids. The bags got tossed into a pile beside a portable or near the building entrance we used to go upstairs to class after the morning bell. When it was time to go in, I'd rifle through the mass of bags and pluck out the one that belonged to me. Since basically every kid in my grade had one of these things, it was very important to be able to quickly distinguish my knapsack from the others. The ways in which my fellow students decorated theirs could vary widely, but there were at least two elements that were used by nearly everyone: artwork or imagery of some kind that was created using the magic of liquid paper, and the prominent, visually unmistakable addition of one's initials. My mother, Doreen, gave me two names at birth that come from Latin: Gregory, which means watchful, vigilant, and Anthony, which means priceless one. The surname I received, Frankson, comes from my matrilineal ancestors through my mother's biological father, Leroy, and is the English name we received from our plantation slave masters hundreds of years ago. Through my maternal grandmother, the indomitable Iceland Belzy Pink, I am also a member of the Oliver family that hails from Browns Hall in the hills of St. Catherine in Jamaica. On my father Leecroft's side, I am a member of the McLagan family, who can trace their Jamaican lineage through their white oppressors back to the Robertson clan in Scotland. However, both lines have lost the overt connections to their original African identities as a cruel byproduct of the barbarous transatlantic slave trade. I have always taken the matter of my name very seriously. Names contribute to how families confer identity, one of the most important markers of a person's place in society. They also leave clues as to how one's ancestors moved through the world and help to inform how we came to be in the context in which we find ourselves. That cold Tuesday, January 28th, 1975, my mother brought me into the world at Toronto East General Hospital in East York and gave me the name Gregory Anthony Frankson, while hoping and praying that my life would be blessed, prosperous, and happy. No doubt in her mind, she felt I was priceless. I'm sure she also hoped I would grow into the kind of watchful person that was aware of his context in the world. I'm certain she prayed that I would remain ever vigilant to the perils of being born Black and male in a society that fears the presence of Black male strength, intelligence, and ambition, and does whatever is necessary to stifle it and suppress it. I'm also sure she understood that there was no way for me to completely avoid the negative aspects of my sociogenetic heritage, but prayed for it anyway. One fateful day, some eagle-eyed kid in the St. Barbara schoolyard noticed something they found interesting about my initials. I had used a ballpoint pen to decorate one of the front pockets on my canvas knapsack with my initials. This watchful, vigilant, and priceless son of Frank had written GAF in block lettering so large and thick that it could easily be seen at a distance. I never had much trouble picking it out of a pile of similar items at the side entrance to the school. Therefore, it wasn't very difficult for other students to pick me out and then pick on me once they realized that GAF spelled backwards was a slur that no one ever wants to be called, especially a straight Black boy in a Scarborough schoolyard in 1986. So that's just a little tease on that. And then you can go back and you can read the rest of the essay after you have your copy of the book. And so why is this collection important? This collection is important because we find ourselves at a very significant moment in the history of this country. We saw what happened after the murder of George Floyd, and we saw what happened all across the world as people finally woke up to what Black people have been saying for decades, that we're suffering, that we're struggling, that we're having difficult time, and that it is in fact time for people to start to take our issues more seriously. And so what I'd like to do right now is I want to just refer to an article that I had published in the Globe and Mail this past weekend and just share a little chunk from it, because it really does summarize and encapsulate sort of the energy that I want to share with you for the rest of the presentation here before we open things up for questions and comments. Because Blackness in Canada has always had to struggle to find its place. It has always had to struggle in order to find ways to express itself in a way that is safe, in a way that is empowering, and in a way that is going to uplift other people within the community. Instead, we have faced systemic barriers. We have faced institutional anti-Black racism. We have faced violence, both physical, mental, and emotional, and spiritual. And in all of that, we have finally, in this moment, and it took, of course, the death of a Black man on a video recording that people had no choice but to look at for 9 straight minutes in the midst of a pandemic where they didn't have anything else to distract them. It took that for the pain and the difficulty that Black people have been facing to finally be taken seriously and for real action to be taken. And so this article that was called "For Black Canadians, There's No Going Back to the Way Things Were," this is just a little snippet that I want to share with you about that from the Globe and Mail. And so you'll see on the screen the image that went along with that article in the newspaper. I'll just read you a couple of paragraphs from it. As the desire for change crested after Mr. Floyd's death, some folks got to work. New programs such as the Black North Initiative went virtually overnight from low-key twinkles in their creators' eyes to nationwide prominence, enrolling the titans of Canadian industry. The establishment of confronting anti-Black racism and equity, diversity, and inclusion, or EDI, units in governments and corporations accelerated. Funding programs, community-based initiatives by charitable and not-for-profit organizations, and investment-mandated money pots, such as the Black Opportunity Fund, sprang up with unprecedented rapidity. As if by magic, it seemed like every online board under heaven mushroomed with EDI employment opportunities. Huge numbers of people suddenly had a burning need to be seen aboard the "Let's Help Black People" bandwagon. That explosion of energy in the second half of 2020 managed to carry us all the way through 2021. Now, with George Floyd fading into history and corporate EDI box checked off, Black Canada's 15 minutes are almost up. The Black community has always known this moment would come. Eventually, it was said in community circles, people will tire of talking about our issues and sick of actively confronting our challenges. They simply don't have the stamina that our history and experiences have forced us to develop. It's easy for people who aren't Black to walk away from a cause that doesn't affect their daily lives, then relegate those concerns to the fringes of their awareness in favor of the latest hot topic. For us, focus is a means of survival, advocacy a vital necessity, and silence a death sentence. We will keep at it, but will they be willing to listen, much less act, once our cause is no longer fashionable? And those are the questions that folks within the Black community are asking themselves now. How much longer before it gets completely pushed to the inattentive fringes? Our concerns, our issues. You know, one of the things that I quoted in that article was a statistic from the draft report of the first ever National Black Canadian Survey, which quoted that Black men earn 66 cents on the dollar of what white men earn. And that's a stat that came out in the spring of 2021. That's real world statistics, just one of many, many difficult statistics where it comes to what's happening in the social services sector, what's happening in the courts, what's happening with police, what's happening in our schools, what's happening in government. we can go on and on talking about all of the different institutional manifestations of the ways in which Black folks have been banging their heads against a proverbial brick wall for forever. And now, just in this moment, when the death of George Floyd has created that bit of energy and motivation, folks are now starting to think about other things. They're worried about the Freedom Convoy rolling into their town. They're worried about how the Omicron variant is having impacts on what's going on for them. They're worried about the snow that fell and how are they going to clear their driveway. All of these things, of course, are very important. As other issues come up, we have to continue to live our lives, and we all have to live with other challenges and whatnot. But as time goes by, we are in a place where it's going to become very easy for people to turn off and tune out the Black community. And we've been turned off and tuned out for far too long. In that respect, this book arrives at exactly the right moment. AfriCANthology is one way that we can leverage the stories and the shared experiences that we are experiencing as Black people, no matter whether we live in Fredericton or if we live in Montreal, if we live in Halifax or if we live in Calgary, if we live in Guelph or if we live in Vancouver. There are so many things that unify us as Black people, and the challenges that we face are such that they cannot be simply ignored away. You cannot simply say, well, you had your 15 minutes, that time is over, now it's okay, you're all dealt with now. We threw some money at it, now you're good to go. We cannot allow that to happen. And by using the stories and the momentum that we are creating through AfriCANthology, we get to create a new type of advocacy, an advocacy that is based upon and rooted in the lived experience of the folks who are making serious cultural contributions to the building, the maintenance, and the growth and the future of what this Canadian country needs to look like, what our citizenry wants to define, and what our national leaders need to take into account as they create the policy framework that is going to guide where we move forward. We have to think about it in the context of what's happening in our schools, because we know that, at Western, of course, we've just created this equity, diversity, and inclusion function, hired Opio Oloyo to run it, but there is so much work that needs to be done beyond that. We can't just simply put people into a job, tell them to go to work, and then underfund them, ignore them, push them to the sidelines, and refuse to follow their guidance. And so when we talk about that in the context of Blackness, Black people in this country have been suffering long enough. And because of what we saw from governments and from organizations in not-for-profit sector and from companies, corporations, that folks were able to mobilize and activate virtually overnight in order to respond to a pressing situation, in this case, the COVID-19 pandemic. It can never be said again to the Black community that we have to wait, that we have to go slow, that there isn't enough available to us in terms of resources in the now, and you've got to wait till next year. You got to wait till 2 years. You got to wait till 5 years. You got to wait till 10 years down the road. We know that if there is a true priority, that everyone can flip on a dime. That has been clearly demonstrated throughout the pandemic. And so any attempt to slow walk progress will not be tolerated. And now we are creating our own history through the kinds of books that we're creating with AfriCANthology, building on the progress of previous anthologies that were created, such as The Great Black North, such as the Great Prairie Anthology that was put together by Corinne Vernon, such as Black Writers Matter that was put together by Whitney French a couple of years ago. There is an incredible amount of energy and passion that is coming out within the Black community, saying that we don't need to wait for anybody to create something for us anymore. We will create our own vehicles. We will create our own organizations. You know, the Black North Initiative was created by Black people for Black people. The Black Opportunity Fund was created by Black people for Black people. It's great that the federal and provincial governments and charitable associations and foundations want to contribute to those kinds of causes, but do not get it wrong. We are organizing ourselves. We are pushing forward on our own right because we understand what's happening in our communities. We can see what's happening with our people. People are stressed out. People are dealing with incredible strains and stresses, raising our children in this, in this society that is defined within the parameters of white supremacy. And yes, and now we are able to now come out because of George Floyd and name white supremacy for what it is, to have those kinds of conversations and to talk about the fact that we as settlers are also oppressing Indigenous communities in ways that Black people can very deeply understand. But white supremacy can be flipped on its head. It can be overthrown. And that's what our next focus has to be. But in the meantime, we also need to take time to take note of and to honor and to provide support and encouragement for those of us within the Black community who are truly struggling with everything that's going on in the world right now. And so I want to share with you a poem that speaks to that a little bit, because there are people within our community, within our Black community, that are broken right now. And so I want to share with you this poem, which is called The Broken, in recognition of the mental and spiritual anguish of my people and what we can do to focus on fixing it through vehicles like AfriCANthology. So the poem goes like this. The beautifully brave are like brittle birch bark bent by blows, born with breath bated, barely able to maintain emotional communion with the vibrations innate to their souls. And when pressure exerted on their reed of society bends it to the breaking point and no other option remains, they snap. Like the click of a camera shutter locks in the scream of a child defiled by napalm in the jungles of Vietnam into the trauma center of memory, they snap. Like defeated legacies of arms, extremities buckle under stress as force of impact shatters the weak who lack backbone, they snap. Like the tenuous connections of neural endings press beyond the limits of comfort as the mind is assaulted by relentless past torments, they snap. Like the crackling pop of leather strap against prepubescent skin, crispy as the words chewing out raw hide, they snap. Because they have no choice, because cohesiveness and wholeness are sad replacements for holding it all together when falling apart is a better way to cast this compound fracture. The broken need a break from breaking. So they snap, just so they can finally be still. And so as we keep that in mind, as we keep in mind the struggles and the difficulties that are faced by the community, we also need to acknowledge and uplift the support that people are giving to one another, the accomplishments that people are achieving, the triumphs that we are experiencing, and the overcoming that is becoming a very strong part of our path forward as Black people in this country. And so as we do that, as we move forward from this, this difficult time of turmoil and conflagration, we want to then talk about, well, what is the way forward for the Black community in this current context? What are some of the things that we can be looking at in order to move forward in a powerful, strong, concerted, and an effective way. And so there are many, many aspects that we need to look at, but I'm just going to touch on 5 to give you all something to think about, something to take away and to consider in terms of what we can do moving forward as a community. The first is that I love that I'm here speaking to you at Western in February in the middle of Black History Month, but you know what they say, I'm Black every day. And so what we need to do is to shift how we focus on the Black community away from a nearly exclusive focus on what happens in Black History Month and the time period just before it, you know, with Martin Luther King Day, all the way to the time just after it. You can still get a few things going on until March 21st, the International Day Against Racism and Ethnic Discrimination. That time period, those roughly 8 weeks, I affectionately refer to as Black People High Season. And so what we need to do is to spread that out so that we're talking about the experiences of Black folks, the experiences across the diaspora, and particularly here within Canada, all 365 days of the year. So we need to approach the Black community from a Black 365 perspective. The second thing that we need to do is to stop providing opportunities for folks to learn about Black communities and Black Canadians, if they're offered at all, as electives off to the side, not really important to what's being done. Blackness needs to be part of the core curriculum because Blackness is at the core of what it means to be Canadian. We've been here since the very beginning. When Samuel de Champlain showed up and landed on the shores of Quebec, he brought Mathieu de Costa with him, and that was his interpreter, and he was a Black man. Black people have literally been here since the very beginning. And so because of that, our contributions to the history and the evolution of this country need to be treated as a central feature and not as a corollary, underfunded, underexposed, elective, optional thing to be added if you're lucky. And people need to understand that history and to see how it's central, not just here in Ontario and Quebec, not just in Nova Scotia, but also up north, also out west, also on the prairies. Black people have been here from the start everywhere in this country. We also need to make the shift in our mind as our society has become more and more obsessed with credentials. We need to remember that qualification and credential is not the same thing. And when we talk about organizations that look at credentials in a certain way, saying that those are the sole measures of how we should be bringing in talent in order to build our organizations, what we're doing is we're leaving out those folks who have that lived experience, those qualifications that come from the hard work that they've done throughout their lives in many different forums, that actually provides them with all of the skill sets and competencies that we need in order to properly diversify our organizations and provide them with the kind of insights and aspects of their experience that will actually help to grow and expand and make those organizations more impactful and profitable. So we need to move past a sole focus on credential and think about what qualification really means for a group of people who have been traditionally left out of the having access to power, having access to opportunity, and having access to the financial resources in order to be able to easily support themselves, and so that they can thrive, so they can move beyond simple subsistence and the need to simply survive. And then we need to be able to hire to inspire. Once we've got those folks within our organization, we need to put in place supports that will help them to grow and to prosper within those settings, so that they can then be promoted into the higher levels of organizations and eventually into leadership. We need to see more Black people who are out there in front, who are leading, who are demonstrating, who are showing. And we are starting to see that, but now is not the time to give up on that. Now that people are starting to forget about George Floyd, we can start to put other folks into place here in Canada that are going to continue to inspire, who are going to continue to work, who are going to continue to build, and who are going to provide us with the kinds of examples that we can show to our children and to our children's children. And finally, we need to live the idea that every voice is important, and that important voice that you have has value. And that is what we are uplifting through this AfriCANthology project. Each of the artists who appear in this work, who have written their poems, who have written their essays, Gary Weeks, who provided the image on the front of that and has been doing incredible work from a visual artistic perspective in his photography and his fine art. All of us, we are expressing ourselves through our particular individual unique voices, but pooled together, those voices have even greater resonance and a greater possibility of creating the kind of change that we wish to see. At the beginning of the book, in place of a personal dedication, I put inside instead an East African proverb that I wanted to use as a dedication to the Black community. And that East African proverb is, sticks in a bundle are unbreakable. And that's what happens when each one of the sticks in the bundle is able to express themselves. We are impoverished by the silence of people and enriched by their roar. So we really want to encourage people to roar. We created AfriCANthology as a gift to show the way, to provide an example of what that roar could sound like coming from the individual reader. And when these Black kids, when these Black youth, when these Black adults read this book and they see themselves reflected in the stories and in the poetry and the conversations, what I want to inspire for them is to say, look, we have platforms where we can speak. Your experiences are being honored. You can identify and see yourself in the stories that are being shared in this collection. So by all means, go forward and share your own story. Become part of that grander conversation. And then in that way, we can uplift the entire Black community. We can strengthen it. We can reassert our central place in Canadian history and in the Canadian cultural milieu. And in that way, and in that fashion, we continue to ignite folks to continue to contribute, to grow and to prosper. And we contribute a huge portion to what it essentially means, not just to be a Black Canadian, but to be a Canadian, period. We don't create just Black Canadian history here. We create Canadian history. And so as I wrap up here and give an opportunity to hear feedback and questions from all of you, before we do that, I just want to leave you with one final performance, one final poem that will speak directly to that. And that piece is one that I dedicate to future generations, and it's called Ignite. And it goes like this. Spark the light, ignite. Heat up the atmosphere in Kelvin, Celsius, and Fahrenheit. Dance and cast shadows as scorched leaves and wood flicker, and the crowd around the bonfire grows thicker and thicker. Share tales of yore passed down from generation to generation to warm up your thoughts and set a light imagination. When you breathe, feel the blaze of ash-laden air in your lungs. Feed the fire you feel inside, your conflagration just begun. Stir the embers that singe the sky with every spin, strum, sachet, and stroke. Forever you first notice fire, it is always signaled by smoke. It carries memory of solidity before fuel converts to flame, looks down upon the gathering, reflects upon from whence it came, a sense one's free from inhibition, sets an example we should heed, while chaff lit incendiary burns at a flame with constant speed. Shake the dust from your clothing, use your singular voice to blend with the chorus before us, make inflammatory choice, spark the light, ignite. Boil like lava beneath the calm, then create streams of creativity like volcanic balm. Flow flips from feeble to fire starter, blackened heart seared in flame. When forged in such heat, you can never be the same. Singe to char every last fear, vaporize tears from your eyes, burn bright enough to endear you to the dawn as you rise. To inspire, we must wax like stars burn, celestial bright. Melt excuses with the blaze, and when you feel the moment is right, seize the space to find cleansing through creative delight, then share it with hopeful abandon to everyone within sight. But for those beyond your hand's grasp, burn fury etched deep into their palms. Energy the artistic you emits enriches like spiritual alms. So whether you dance, paint, sculpt, sing, play, act, write, or recite, when your passions ignite, shine when you spark your light. And so I just once again want to thank all of you for taking the time to be here today. And thank you once again to the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at Western for setting this up. I'm going to stop here. I've just put up my contact information. And of course, you can also find out more about the project itself through AfriCANthology.ca. And I'll just take this moment to sit back, and we'll go to questions and comments at this time.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you so much, Greg, for your passion and discussing your lived experience, but then also giving us me particularly. I wrote your 6 pieces of advice down, and sharing your stories. It was really profound. And I on behalf of, I know the chat's not open, but I think all our attendees feel some form of gratitude. And I thank you for coming to Western and sharing your knowledge with us. I will go over to the Q&A in a minute, but I think I have, I'll start us off with one question. And that is, in your article in the Global Mail, and you kind of alluded to this in the second piece of advice that you had given us, was that, and I'll just directly quote, "We must ensure our education system teaches these stories to a current and future generations as part of the core curriculum and not simply as an underfunded and neglected elective studies." And then you also talked about these new EDI offices, these new DEI offices. And I think, if you could elaborate a little bit as to what particularly these offices should and could be doing for not just the advancement and the recognition of Black individuals, but also towards the larger community, which is Canada. I guess I'll start us off with that, if that's okay.
Yes, of course. And what I'll say is, ultimately, it's a good thing that folks are starting to organize themselves and make those efforts in a coordinated fashion. I'm very happy to see that. But what we cannot allow to happen is for folks to think, okay, well, we set up an EDI office, we created a Black Studies program, we're done now. We've got a minor in Black Studies, you should be happy. Like, that's not what's going to cut it. From a curricular perspective, we want there to be more Black Studies programs, but we also want there to be more Black professors. We want there to be more Black staff people at schools. We want to encourage and to create a pipeline for Black students, many of whom are facing discrimination and difficulty within the K-12 system and having a hard time getting through that to graduation with the kind of marks that they need in order to get into these institutions of higher learning. And, and we can do that without sacrificing quality, which always becomes the argument. Well, if we start letting in more of these folks, well, they're not actually qualified to be there. Well, I don't think that that's necessarily the case. Your marks don't tell the full story. And so what that lived experience is can also play a big role in the possibility of student success. We have to make sure that we're paying attention to that. And universities have started to, over the past decade or so, really started to take that into account. But what we really want to do is, like, we can't just simply recruit people into a bad situation. I'll tell you, with VoiceShare and the work that I do, I have a basic outline which states that any organization is engaged in, in 4 main areas of activity. You have your leadership, the people who are at the front who are setting the direction of the organization. Then you have your operations, what we do and how we do it, your financial controls, your policies, your procedures, your physical plant, etc., all of those things. Then you've got your culture. What is the environment that you're setting up? How are you supporting your staff? Do they have, do they get leave days? Are they getting benefits? Like, what is the culture of the place? Do you have facilities on site that folks can engage in and what have you? And how do you treat people in that space? That's your culture. And then the 4th part is the talent, the actual people, and the skill sets that they bring to the table. But what people tend to do is they'll have leadership, as is happening across the board. They'll identify EDI as a priority, which is fine. Leaders need to lead and figure out ways to address internal issues. But what that leadership often does is they then say, oh, snap, we're looking around. We don't have the people that we need. Let's go out and recruit the people. Let's work on our talent to get that talent in the door so that we can, reflect the community we serve and so on. That is the last step that people should be taking, not the first. And the reason why is because if the leaders do not first address the operations and the culture of the organization and make sure that the environment and how you do things is going to be inclusive of the diversity that is a given within any organization, because we all have men, women, different ethnocultural backgrounds, different sexual orientations and identities, etc. Diversity is a given, but if you can make that environment and make the operations work so that that you have that kind of an inclusive environment, then the environment will do the recruiting for you, and the talent that you want and need will come. They'll be able to be productive and they will feel welcome and honored and respected. But if you just go straight to the talent and say, we've got to fix our recruitment and retention and get more people of color through the door, get more Indigenous people through the door, get more Black people, more women, more people with disabilities, whatever the case may be, and bring them into a bad situation, into a culture and an organizational operation that has not addressed the core fundamental institutional issues that it is reproducing on a daily basis, that talent will show up. They will not be happy. They will not feel included. They will not feel like they're being respected, and they will leave. And they will be the ambassadors of your business or your organization that you are sending out into the world. And when good people say bad things about you, then you're going to have a bad time getting good people to come. And that's what it's got to be about. EDI needs to focus on operations and culture to make a better environment for talent, not try to make it an attempt to get better talent in the door right away without addressing operations and culture first.
Thank you so much for that answer, Greg. And once again, I'm taking notes on all of this as someone who works in the EDI office at Western. We do have a question in the Q&A. And Greg, you'll be able to see it, but I'll just read it out for the other attendees. Thank you so much for an inspiring talk. I do research on personal names and relationships people have with their names through the course of their lives. So I appreciated your story, your name, and your initials on your backpack in school. You analyze your mother's solution to stop the bullying as reinforcing homophobia. What do you think in a similar situation with your own child nowadays? How do parents help Black children shoulder the burden of educating others about social justice while also helping them get through their days safely?
This is a brilliant question, and thank you so much, because so much of the challenge of Blackness right now is, being appointed as the spokesperson or the authority on Blackness, on Black people, on the Black people around you. And that is not always a healthy thing. And, and it's not my job as a Black person, in my everyday, day-to-day thing to just be constantly educating people about what's going on. The extent of my responsibility in terms of your education is to say, number one, you need to get educated. Number two, I'm not the person who's going to do it. Number three, go look at those resources over there. And number four, after you figure out how you feel about it, how you're going to do things, you've made some changes and you've started to implement some actions, then we can start to have a conversation about it. And so what I would tell my children, and what I do tell my kids, is that, folks are going to come at you about your Blackness, and it's okay. But what you really want to do is simply encourage them to ask the right kinds of questions. Just say, hey, you know what? Yeah, you've got this, that, or other question about being Blackness. Is like, have you gone and Googled something? Have you checked out a book out of the library? Like what work have you done to try and answer that question for yourself? And we can arm our kids with that kind of information. That's not the type of thing that only adults can do. Children can do that too. I mean, like, I'm not here for your education or your edification. I am not surely for people's entertainment. I am really looking for achievement and attainment. Like, that's what you can tell people. And that's what we can give as a gift to our children, to allow them to have the strength and the ability and the competencies. We have to arm our children, not just to deal with racism, but to also deal with the folks who want to be on our side, but end up being energy vampires. We just don't have the energy or the time or the strength to do all of the teaching and all of the educating and all of the sharing and all of the supporting all of the time. Y'all got to do it for yourselves. And that's why we create stuff like this. We can tell our story, we can put it in print, we can make it available, and then you can educate yourself. And we can do the same thing with a huge assortment and of wonderful children's books that are being created now that talk about issues and perspectives from a Black child's perspective. It's brilliant, and it absolutely can be done.
Thank you so much, Greg. And I'm sure I hope that the person who asked that question is also got some profound answer from that. We probably have time for 2 more questions, and I guess I'll put one other one out there. Is and Greg, this is a bit of a maybe slightly personal question for you. Is that we've seen time and time again that Black scholars, Black writers, Black artists tend to have a difficult time with things like critics and getting, the recognition that they deserve. And just talking to you as we do, that article that you had written in the Global Mail did get a little bit of reactions. And so maybe you can tell me as a Black scholar, as a Black writer, as a Black artist, how you deal with that pressure that comes to you, and maybe provide some advice on to others who might be in similar situations.
I was raised by a small, strong, and hard-headed Jamaican woman who taught me that it's important that I be strong-willed and that I have thick skin, but that I also be very caring and compassionate, courteous and open-minded, understanding and constantly learning about myself and the people around me. And so as I put this out, as I work as an advocate and an activist, as I work as an editor and a writer and a poet, and putting my words onto the page and onto the internet and onto stages and sharing them with the world, and accepting the slings and arrows that come along with that particular path, I understand the purpose of what I am doing. I am working for a cause that is much larger than myself. So I am seeking to enroll people in the possibility of creating a better world than the one in which we currently inhabit. And that isn't to say that there aren't wonderful and great things about the world that we're in right now. And in fact, I strongly celebrate every big win and encourage other people to also celebrate their wins at every moment. Eat all of the cake, do all of the dances, drink all of the champagne. Like, really take that on for yourself. But at the end of the day, the criticism is usually an indication that I'm on to something, because it's just like the hermit crab. The hermit crab grows in a shell and grows and grows and grows, and then it reaches a point where it can no longer grow out and gets very, very uncomfortable within that shell. So what does it do? It sheds that shell, and then it grows a newer, bigger shell, one that can accommodate its growth. So this is what we need to do as a society: shed the shell of white supremacy, shed the shell of racism, shed the shell of institutional oppression, and accommodate the growth that is going on in many communities across this country, Black communities and beyond, and grow a new, better, all-encompassing shell that can house the growth that is necessary for the Canada of tomorrow.
Powerful words as always, Greg, and once again, very profound. We have time for one more question, and there is luckily one question in the Q&A that I would love to read out, and I think it's an important question to ask. So I will do that. Thank you for your wisdom and passion. You briefly spoke about the challenges Black people are facing in the pandemic. I wonder, with the development of the convoy movement that is both literal and a figurative vehicle for white supremacy, how is it impacting you and your family? And to me, this is much more important. How can we support the people and communities who are being targeted at this time?
Well, that's powerful. I mean, it is definitely impacting me on a personal level. You know, my daughters actually live in Ottawa, and so there are some impacts. Thankfully, they don't live in the downtown core, but you know, it does have an impact on what's going on and how, you know, and how they feel about, excuse me, what's going on in the world. And also with the AfriCANthology, we are being directly impacted by the Freedom Convoy expression that's happening right now, because they have announced that they're going to be moving into downtown Fredericton, which is, you know, a major city and the capital of New Brunswick, on Friday afternoon. And our launch event for the Atlantic provinces was planned for an art gallery in downtown Fredericton for Friday evening. So we are not going to be able to proceed with our launch event, which takes away our ability to interact and connect with people in the Atlantic provinces, with some of the invited poets who aren't even in the anthology, but are people we're bringing in and creating more community around AfriCANthology in New Brunswick. Those folks are not going to have the opportunity to gather and share. So that's a direct negative impact on our project and on the artists who are, you know, are participating directly and indirectly in what we're seeking to create through this AfriCANthology project, which is really disturbing and distressing to me. But when we talk about, you know, the Freedom Convoy as a literal and figurative vehicle for white supremacy, I find it interesting and fascinating that there are folks who are convinced that, you know, the idea of this crusade for freedom doesn't have anything to do with white supremacy. Could you imagine if there was a whole bunch of Black and Indigenous truckers pulling this particular stunt? This thing would have ended within 48 hours. There is no chance that we would have people rolling into provincial capitals across this country, horns honking, noise being made. That just simply would not be tolerated. It wouldn't be something that could be done by people of color and Indigenous folks. It just could not be done. Black people rolling up in, you know, especially if we're talking about the possibility of firearms and weapons and such, there's no way that would be happening. And there's no way that the powers that be would tolerate it. And the army would have been called in by now. And the federal government wouldn't be sitting back on its laurels trying to allow local police forces to deal with it. And so now I have friends who are living in downtown Ottawa, a city where I lived for a decade, who are being significantly and seriously negatively impacted. White supremacy permits things for white folks that it will not allow for other people. That is the exact manifestation of what white supremacy can do. White supremacy can allow these people who are literally protesting and exercising their freedom of association, their free speech, and their right to be heard, and can use that opportunity to claim that their freedoms are being taken away. It is the most absurd, hypocritical, and nonsensical thing that you could ever hope to hear. And I don't understand how folks who are able to freely say that masks don't work can freely choose not to wear masks or not to get vaccinated or to not follow the guidelines wherever they happen to be or wherever they happen to go, are in any way having their freedoms abrogated. We as Canadians, in that Charter of Rights and Freedoms that so many of these folks have been carrying around, we have the right to limit our freedoms, because you're right to swing your arm ends at the tip of my nose. We have to have reasonable restraints and constraints. And so what we need to do is to talk about how we support those people who are being negatively impacted. We need to speak up. We need to make our voices heard. We need to put pressure on local police forces in these provincial and in the national capital to get these people out of where they're at. Their point has been made. They have said exactly what needs to be said. I don't begrudge them the right to be angry and to speak out against the restrictions. That's totally fine and well within their rights. But once you start parking trucks and making it difficult for ambulances and for school buses to drive around and for people to get access to their health care, that is the point at which you have stopped being a protester and you have become a visible and visual manifestation of what is wrong with a society that cannot change its institutional approaches such that everyone can feel welcome and safe. We need to have safety for all, and the Freedom Convoy is taking away that safety. It needs to be eliminated immediately, and we need to be able to have folks feel safe in their own homes.
Thank you for that explanation, Greg, and for that insight. And we all see the passion that you have for not just, you know, Black advocacy, but advocacy moreover as a big fundamental principle. And so we've reached the end of our time. I do want to remind the attendees that Greg's book, AfriCANthology, is part of the Black Excellence book collection at Western and is available to be ordered via the Western bookstore. Greg, I'm going to pass it over to you if you have any last remarks before I end the webinar.
I just want to say thank you very much to everyone for participating in it. I also want to let the people of London know that that I am going to be physically in London later this month as part of the African art marketplace that's being put on by the London Black History Coordinating Committee. I believe it's on the 23rd of February. So if you've listened in and you're in London and you want to come say hi, we'll be there from 10 to 3 at the Innovation Works. And I would love to meet many of you in person and I can sign books if you have them. So with that, I just want to say again, thank you to London. Thank you to Western University. Thank you to its Office of EDI, and thank you to all of you for being here today. And just remember that, if you in order to share the voice you own, you must first own the voice you share. And we're trying to model that through what we're doing with AfriCANthology. Thank you all so much for being here. And thanks so much to Western.
Yes, and thank you so much, Greg. Once again, we cannot thank you enough and how grateful we are at the EDI office at Western and in Canada gets to have you as someone to talk about these issues. And we look forward, I know I look forward to meeting you in London if you are here. And also I believe one of our other speakers, Christina Lord, who does a lot of work with the London Black History Month Coordinating Committee, might also be there. But thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you to the attendees and have a good night, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Everyone.